It still feels strange to be doing this and not being able to see any of you, but thank you so much for joining tonight on your Wednesday evening. And hopefully, even if there's just a few things that you can take away from tonight, that will be really worthwhile. So, like Lindsay said, and thanks so much to them for kind of inviting me in the first place, this is really an introduction to performance nutrition. So, I know there's a variety of people on the call, but this is really based at kind of junior athletes maybe aiming to transition to a senior athlete in the next few years. And what we're doing tonight is really looking at getting the basics right for your sports nutrition to help you progress to a really good, robust senior athlete. So I know there was quite a few questions sent beforehand, and I have had a good read of all of them. So hopefully I will answer most of those as we go through tonight. If there's anything that you want to ask specifically, then like Lindsay said, please put that in the questions. If you have a question that's really, really specific, then I might not be able to answer that in the group setting just because there are so many of us. But hopefully, things that we touch on will kind of answer most questions in one way or another. So, um, now this has stopped letting me go to the next slide. There we are. So tonight I'm going to cover looking at what is performance nutrition. So how does that differ from kind of what you might learn in school and things about healthy eating and what is a balanced diet? Thinking about what are your nutritional requirements for training and racing. So what might that look like and how do we structure it around your busy days, whether that's school, college, uni, whatever else you've got going on. Thinking about how we plan nutrition around training and competition, I know that was a question that came up quite a lot, was things like how do I eat on days where I've got multiple rounds of competition? What's the best thing to eat just before training? So we'll have a look at this. Thinking about what we do after training. So that initial recovery window is really, really key for getting your nutrition in and helping you to adapt from the session and get the most out of it. And then making sure we're well hydrated and things as well. So I'll come back to this kind of top line quite a lot tonight, but really eating for health is eating for performance. So first of all, we need to make sure we're healthy and we're getting everything we need in our diet to keep our body robust, strong, and give it everything that it needs so that we're not always breaking down with illness and injury. Because ultimately, it's that consistency of training that helps us to get the most out of ourselves. So these are our kind of goals of sports nutrition. So we're optimizing how we fuel, how we adapt from training, and how we recover afterwards. We want to minimize risk of illness and injury and optimize how much training consistency you can get. And like this little picture on the right hand side there, one size doesn't fit all. So I'm aware tonight I'm going to be talking in more general principles, but I think thinking about how that applies to you, your lifestyle, your training load, I think is really important because not everyone should be eating kind of in the same way. And then this is my kind of performance nutrition pyramid, I guess. And what we're going to be focused on is that base layer tonight. So thinking about your everyday diet, all the daily nutrition from your macro, micronutrients that you need to keep your body healthy and to fuel what you're doing. Above that, we have sports foods, which might come in the form of drinks, gels, bars. And these might be things that once we get to a certain level of training or training load, we need to supplement our diet with these things to help us to get enough energy in. After that, we look at things like supplements, so certain cases where we might need additional vitamins and minerals or other supplements to make sure we're getting everything we need. And on the top of the pyramid is the things I call the kind of icing on the cake things, the things that when we've got all the basics right for nutrition, they might give us an extra boost on race day. And these are things like caffeine, beetroot juice, creatine. These are just a few of the things that there's good evidence for. However, if we're just doing these things at the top and we've not got a really good base, that's still not going to work very well. So the things that are towards the top of the pyramid are the things that have very good marketing behind them. And you'll see, in the shops and with very kind of catchy logos and things. But ultimately, it is the maybe boring everyday diet that's going to help you to get where you want to be. So that's really what we're going to kind of home in on tonight. And then I just wanted to just quickly have a look at why I guess we're looking so much at, and a lot of my work, I guess, is with athletes that are almost transitioning from a junior to a senior athlete. My background was in cross country, middle distance running as a member of Kilbarcan Athletics Club. So I very much went through this pathway and know that it's a tricky time between you can be quite a good junior athlete in Scotland and doing quite well. And then you maybe move away to uni and there's lots of different demands that make it more difficult to kind of stay in the sport at the same level. So thinking about just from a nutrition point of view, as junior athletes, I guess these are some of the things that I've kind of highlighted that junior athletes might have to kind of look at and cope with and deal with. And I guess the ones in red are maybe primarily looking at the nutrition side of things. So we can see that maybe, like you say, family might do a lot more meal preparation. They might help you to get to training and things like that. Whereas when you become a senior athlete, the amount of things that you become responsible for just massively increases. So I think if you're thinking about moving away to uni in the next year or two, this is a really, really key time to be thinking about your nutrition and thinking about becoming as independent as you can with your nutrition so that when you do move away and there's all these extra things you need to think about, like shopping, cooking, planning meals, additional social pressures, things like that, nutrition then can sometimes take a little bit of a back seat. So I think this is a really good time to be thinking about, oh, well, actually, if I get some really good strategies in place in terms of how I fuel my training, how I recover well afterwards, if I can get a few meals that I'm really good at cooking that I know are healthy, that sets you up quite well then to be able to fuel yourself as you move away to uni and as you transition then to a senior athlete who can cope with a much more demanding training load as well. So I think that's just useful to kind of bear in mind as we go through and as you maybe think about some goals for yourself to take away in terms of, what we might be working on after this. So I'm sure lots of you will have seen this, probably not in a sports context, but many of you will have seen it at school, work, college, lots of other places. But this is the Eat Well guide, and this is the kind of national guidance on what a healthy balanced diet should look like. And I think I usually show this because it definitely still has relevance for athletes as well. I think what we might do is maybe just adjust the proportions. So again, depending on our event, we need more carbohydrates. So the yellow group would shift that a little bit more. In terms of proteins, your fruit, that might go up a little bit as well. But these are essentially the components of our healthy, balanced diet. And we want to be trying to make sure that we are getting something from each food group. You'll see the things in the bottom left there, all the kind of nice things like the maybe biscuits or sweeter things. They kind of sit outside of the plate usually. And I guess this is where sports nutrition kind of differs from just our general healthy eating, is that as athletes, we need more of these foods to help us to meet the energy demands of the training that we're doing. So if we were just eating lots and lots of fruit and veg, maybe a little bit of carbs and a little bit of protein, we're probably not going to meet the energy demands of what we're doing at school, training, preparing for competition, and everything else. And that's where some of those other things come in, which we will talk about. That doesn't mean that instead of having lunch, you have a chocolate bar. It just means that these kind of things might come in as extras to help you meet your energy needs over the day. So, as we're going through tonight, I want you to just have a think about maybe what you had to eat yesterday or today, or maybe a typical training day. And think about if you were to write that down, what would that look like? Would it be that you don't have breakfast because you kind of are in a rush in the morning? Would you tend not to snack during the day because you're quite busy? Or would you maybe go straight from lunch right through to training without having anything else to eat? So, have a think about what your schedule would look like, how often you eat. Do you maybe struggle to eat before or after training? Whether that's, if you eat too close to training, you might get a stitch or you feel a bit sick or something. Have a think about what that looks like for you because I think the type of food you're having and the timing can make a big difference in terms of how you feel and how you recover from that session. So have a think about that, and maybe if you do have a little bit of paper, you can write it down as well, beside you, just to kind of so that you have a bit of a visual of what your day looks like. So then if we think about our kind of training day nutrition or kind of any day, most people could tell me these are the basic components of what we need. So we've got our overall energy, we've got our carbohydrate, protein, fats, vitamins and minerals or micronutrients, and our fluid. So most of us could probably say, yeah, that's what I know that we need. But I think it's all these questions that are coming up around the side now that make it more difficult to decide what are we actually going to have. So thinking about, well, how much should I have? What time is training? How far away is training? So I know some people do travel, 45 minutes an hour to get to training. And having that travel time to or from training can make a massive difference in terms of how you actually fuel that session. What type of food are you going to have? Lots of things like this. So I think that's the things that we're going to try and work through in terms of answering some of these questions about each of these kind of food groups. So, thinking first of all about energy availability, and I'm going to come back to what happens if we're not quite getting enough a little bit later on. But energy availability is really means that we have enough energy available in our body to do all the kind of processes inside of our body, heart, lungs, everything else, plus energy then to do our training. So that's that kind of bottom line there. On the top line, you can see that might be the daily energy intake from food and drinks. And if you've got that little bit of a gap each day, that can kind of build up over time. And then we can creep into kind of what we call low energy availability, or we start to get some signs and symptoms that we're not quite meeting our energy needs day to day. And that can be really, really subtle and happen over quite a long period of time. So, thinking about making sure we are having regular meals as athletes, we really need to be snacking between meals. So, 3 meals a day is not going to be enough. I talk about kind of maximizing eating opportunities throughout the day. So, making sure we're kind of snacking between each meal, making sure we're having our pre and post training snack so that we're kind of, yeah, building or fueling around the training that we're doing. Okay, so we're going to kind of look through the different food groups now and think about how much we need and how that fits into our overall diet. So carbohydrates are really the key nutrient that provides us with energy. And for all young athletes, no matter what your event is, you will need a lot of carbohydrates to fuel growing, all the kind of mental energy that you use at school, plus all the extra energy expenditure you're using at training. And apart from just pure energy, carbohydrates are really key for concentration, for decision making. So, again, if you're doing exams or if you've got lots of other things going on, concentration is going to be really key for that. And that's what carbohydrate foods can help us with. In terms of injury prevention, there's good research that having carbohydrate snacks after training can help with optimizing bone health and preventing more bony injuries. So, carbohydrates are important with that. The same goes for immunity. So, protecting our immune system after training by having some carbohydrates is key there. And for anyone in more kind of technical or skill-based events, carbohydrates are really key for helping us to execute those skills correctly, and especially as we get more fatigued. So, really, really important for lots of different things. And I guess carbohydrates have maybe been kind of unfairly demonized in some areas of society by people saying, oh, I'm going to follow a low carbohydrate diet, or various parts of social media talking about reducing carbohydrates. But I think for young athletes, they're a really, really crucial part of your diet. So I would definitely encourage you to be having them with every meal and including regular snacks through the day. I kind of distinguish carbohydrates into two different types then, depending when we might have them and what we might kind of use them for. So we've got some carbohydrates that I kind of call fast acting, and that just means that they are very quickly absorbed into your body and available as energy for your body to use. So these are things that are really good to have pre-training, post-training, because that's when your body is going to use these really quickly. So things like if you were having a snack just before training, something like cereal bar, flapjack, a massive fan of a jam sandwich because it's dead easy. And if you have white bread with jam, it's portable. Again, if you were going from school to training, you could take that in a bag and it would, not kind of, it would stay as it is basically through the day. So that's a good option. Things like malt loaf, Soren's another good one. And smoothies as well, if people really struggle to eat before training, that kind of energy in a drink can be helpful to help people to just boost energy, but without getting any stomach issues as well. I've mentioned sports drinks there, so things like potentially things like Lucozade and things are definitely not something I'd recommend to use every day because I think definitely the dentist wouldn't be very happy if you're always drinking sugar. But certainly where they can be useful is say on a race day, if you're someone who really struggles to eat because of race day nerves, anxiety, things like that. Just topping up energy with a sports drink on race day or between rounds of races can be a really helpful strategy to just get some energy in, but without kind of upsetting your stomach too much. So I'd save those kind of drinks for, yeah, kind of race day or, um, yeah, between rounds of races and things as well. Then on the right hand side there, we've got your slower release carbohydrate, and these are things that you would have kind of at your meal times, maybe away from training. So they're still really important for us to have because they've got good fiber in them, which helps our bowels, good vitamins, and generally good kind of slower release energy, which helps to sustain us over the day. So things like having wholemeal bread, whether that was toast in the morning, having oats, things like potato, sweet potato, rice, pasta, all these things are really, really good to be having with your meals. But like I say, the kind of fast acting or the more what I call maybe white carbs or higher in sugar, they're what I would have just before training because it's very easy for your body to digest. And then people always say, well, how much should I have? And I guess this kind of slide probably comes with quite a lot of disclaimers in terms of it's dependent on this and this and this. But I know people sometimes like a number. So if you do like a number and you know what your body weight is, you can do a bit of a calculation, and you know kind of roughly what amount of training you do. But like I say, I've put a few caveats on the left there that it is dependent on the phase of training that you're in. So as your training will vary throughout the year, I guess most people are possibly coming into their biggest volume in the winter this time of year, and then that might taper off as you come into competition. So we'll probably need a bit more in terms of carbohydrate at this time of year. It'll definitely vary on your event. If you're a more kind of long distance cross country, you'll definitely need more than if you're kind of a strength and power athlete. It can also vary on the phase of your menstrual cycle as well. So again, I could do a whole other talk on just fueling around your menstrual cycle, but definitely as you come into the end of that luteal phase towards your period, your carbohydrate requirements do increase. And that's sometimes why you get the kind of cravings for sweeter foods and things, but that is a physiological shift that does happen. So I think bear that in mind. And again, anyone's specific medical history, medical conditions, medications, that can all influence our own requirements. So just kind of, yeah, bear that in mind when you're thinking about maybe taking some of these numbers. I just gave a bit of an example there with a really easy number, which was 50 kilograms. So if you weighed 50 kilograms and you trained around 2 hours a day, that would be around what, in terms of 250 to 350 grams of carbohydrate per day, would be roughly what I would think you would need. In terms of what that might look like then, in terms of actual food, this day is definitely not balanced for other nutrients. So we're just talking about carbohydrates here. But say you had something like 2 slices of toast with some Nutella in the morning, then you had an apple at break time, then you had a jacket potato at lunch, and maybe then some yogurt with some honey. Then in the afternoon, you might have a cereal bar, a banana. Then, kind of before training, you might have a flapjack. Then, after training, you might have some chocolate milk. Again, I'll talk more about kind of milk and chocolate milk in particular a bit later. And then you might have your meal that might have like a base of pasta. And then, if you, again, just to make up some of that carbohydrate, I'd added in some like chocolate buttons. So that kind of gives a little bit of a picture of the types of, I guess, the amount of food during the day. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh, well, actually, I don't really have any breakfast. I only really have like a sandwich at lunchtime and then I don't have anything else. You're probably not hitting anywhere near this kind of level of carbohydrate. And that might be somewhere that actually, if you then introduced a snack pre-training or something or post-training recovery, then you might find that that really helps in terms of leg soreness after training, and what you get out of in terms of building strength and things as well. So, yeah, that's just a bit of a snapshot in terms of to put things into a little bit more context in terms of how much what 350 grams of carbohydrate a day might look like. All right. So moving on then to protein. In terms of protein's quite like a trendy nutrient at the moment, I think, and everything's got protein in it. I've seen protein Mars bars, protein Snickers, everything. And I think it's really important that we think about, well, what is actually the role of protein in our body and how much do we actually need? Uh, so we do need protein. It helps with our muscle recovery, adapting from training, our immune system. And these are kind of our requirements here. So it's 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. There isn't any evidence that going above that is going to have, any other benefits in our body. And I guess for some athletes, if you maybe don't have a brilliant appetite and you struggle to meet what you need, having a lot of protein can kind of suppress your appetite slightly, and that might compromise some of the other nutrients. So I would say definitely we want to try and make sure we're getting all our protein we need through our diet rather than supplements, unless, like you say, there's other caveats that mean that you're not able to get enough protein. Most cases, as long as people are eating enough through the day and they're not vegetarian or vegan, most people can meet those requirements quite easily just with diet alone. One thing that is really key with protein is the timing throughout the day. So, what we don't want to do is just have all of our protein in our evening meal, for example. Spreading protein out throughout the day, there's definitely been good research showing that that massively helps with how we absorb it and utilize it in our body. So, having like Greek yogurt as a snack, for example, having, having Greek yogurt or some milk in the morning with our breakfast or eggs in the morning, again, is a good way to get some protein in then. So good kind of lean protein choices would be things like your chicken, turkey, fish, eggs, and then some of your plant-based proteins like beans, lentils, corn, tofu. Red meat, chickpeas and beans are really good sources of iron. We'll come back to iron in a little minute, but again, if you do eat red meat, having that once or twice a week is a good way to help boost our body's iron content, because iron through animal sources is much better absorbed than plant sources. So now I usually would get people to kind of speak to me and answer questions in this bit, but because there are so many of us, I still thought it was valuable to kind of go through this in terms of giving you a bit of context of how much protein is in different foods. If we think about, for example, you'll see average protein bars with about 20 grams of protein in them. It's thinking about how much some of these foods actually have. So I've put first of all a tin of tuna, and this is quite a good, easy, slightly cheaper protein source, and that would have 32 grams in a standard tin of tuna. So again, having that in the middle of the day is an ideal boost of protein. And if you've done some of those numbers in terms of calculating how much you need through the day, that's probably going to be somewhere between maybe 100, 120 grams. So you can easily see how that can build up just with kind of regular foods. The next one I've put is kind of a teaspoon of peanut butter, which is lower, but I put that in there because people often think, oh, peanut butter is a good source of protein. And it has got like 3 grams, so having that on some toast is great, but it's maybe not the most efficient way to get lots of protein in because you obviously get a lot of energy and a lot of extra fats with the peanut butter. So again, it depends on your kind of training goal. If you're someone with a really high training load and high energy need, peanut butter is a brilliant one to add. If not, then it might not be the right choice for your kind of protein. The next one is a glass of milk. So this could be semi-skim, full fat, skimmed, doesn't matter. We're just looking at the protein content. And in a glass, about 200 to 250 mils, there's 9 grams of protein. So that's still a really good amount of protein just in a simple glass of milk before you add anything else to it. And milk, as you'll see as we go through this, is a massive favourite of mine in terms of fueling after training and even as snacks through the day because it provides us with excellent protein, a little bit of carbohydrate, calcium, and some natural electrolytes as well. So that's a really good choice. Then we've got an egg. So an egg is about 6 or 7 grams, depending on the size of the egg. So again, a good source of kind of protein to have either in the morning or lunchtime or to add into another meal. And especially if you kind of add up 2 or 3 eggs, you get quite a lot of protein there. A steak, and kind of people are always surprised at this. I think this might be quite a small steak that I've put on my that I've put on my slide here, but around kind of 30, 35 grams. You would also get a lot of iron with that, so that is still a good thing to be having. Then some Greek yogurt. Now, like I said before, that's a really good way to get some protein in between your meals. So a kind of standard pot, about 125 grams, would be 12 grams of protein. I know you can get these higher protein yogurts now, but that would just be your kind of standard one without anything else added. So even just plain, that's still got a good amount in it. Chickpeas. So chickpeas are standard, like 3 tablespoons as a serving, and that would give us 9 grams. So again, chickpeas are often used in terms of vegetarian meals and things. And while it does have a good amount of protein, you can see how the difference in terms of some of the kind of meat and fish-based proteins, the difference that you would get in there. And that's why I think in vegetarian diets and vegan diets, we just need to be a bit more creative about how we get the protein in without it making it look feel like the food volume is too much, if that makes sense. Then that's supposed to be a chicken breast, and that again is probably larger than the steaks. That's around 35, but a chicken breast is an excellent one, good lean source of protein, and kind of excellent in terms of recovering specifically after kind of strength-based sessions. And then the last one I put on is garden peas. And for a standard serving, that would be about 4 grams. And I know people wouldn't naturally think of these as being a kind of source of protein, but even as a vegetable, like garden peas can provide you with that little bit extra protein so that you can see how easily it overall adds up throughout the day. So hopefully that just helps to give us a little bit more context in terms of what is the protein content of different foods and how your protein will naturally build up across the day as long as we're eating enough and we're not excluding kind of whole food groups, basically. So hopefully that all makes sense. I'm going to keep moving on now to fats. Again, fats, I think sometimes we can think, oh, we should be having everything low fat and not having any fat. And I think some of that comes from, I guess, what we're taught about kind of healthy eating and nutrition at school and things. I guess from my point of view, it depends what are we calling fats. Because by fats, I'm definitely not saying have takeaways every day and, have lots of fried food all the time. But fats are still really important for the absorption of certain vitamins and minerals in our body. They're also really important for our hormone regulation. So our fat intake should never dip below 20% of what we have overall, because that's when we start to get some negative kind of health consequences of that. So good choices would be what I call kind of healthy fats, fats from things like oily fish, from nuts and seeds, oils that you might use in cooking, olive oil, rapeseed oil, things like avocado if people like that. Peanut butter, again, is a really good one, especially for people with kind of that are doing a lot of sport, high energy needs. Peanut butter is a good one to get a bit of good fats and quite a lot of energy in there. I'm not saying again that we should never have fats from other things like processed foods, takeaways, pastries, but these probably should be more in the minority. And what we want to make sure is that we get all those healthy fats and all the other nutrients that we need in first, and having those other things occasionally. These kind of things, if we have them all the time, they might not help our recovery and they can promote more inflammation within the body. So, again, it's probably not something to have all the time after training, but I'm definitely not saying never to have it. I think no food is banned in this kind of setting. So, I think making sure you have a good variety, not excluding anything, I think is really, really important. Okay, and then, like I say, I could highlight loads of vitamins and minerals, but a few really key ones for young athletes in particular, calcium and vitamin D. So, calcium is probably the thing I speak to athletes on a one-to-one basis about most. And as you're kind of growing through your teens and reaching about age 19 or 20, this is when you're reaching your peak bone mass, when your body kind of stops laying down bone and you reach your kind of peak bone mass for adulthood. So you're essentially setting up your bone health going into being a senior athlete and an adult. So these years are super important to make sure that you are getting enough calcium in your diet to prevent kind of more bony injuries as you get older. The amount of calcium that we need is probably slightly more than we often think. And as a kind of teenager into early 20s, your calcium requirements are about 1,500 milligrams a day, which is equivalent to about a litre of milk. So I'm not saying everyone has to drink a litre of milk because you obviously get calcium from lots of other places, but if you were only having that, that's how much you would need. So it is probably quite a lot more than just a bit of milk on your cereal or in a cup of tea, for example. If you don't have any dairy because you're intolerant or you don't like it, I think probably a really key takeaway would be to have a think about maybe what alternative milk or yogurt or source could you try and see if you get on with. So all of the alternative milks now, soya, oat milk, almond milk, they all have, they're all fortified with the same amount of calcium as cow's milk. But soya is probably the closest in terms of protein content. Some of the others have very, very little protein. So that would be usually my first choice. But again, finding one that you like is probably the key thing. And then the nutrient that goes hand in hand with calcium is vitamin D. So vitamin D helps our body to absorb calcium. We don't have as much control over this, I guess, because the main source is sunlight. So pretty much all of us, well, definitely all of us over the winter months in the UK could benefit from a vitamin supplement. So this is the only nutrient where I'll be saying definitely a supplement is recommended because there's only really, really small amounts can be found in food. So we're definitely not going to get enough that we need. And especially between October and April, the sunlight that we do get is not strong enough to help our body make vitamin D. So a general vitamin D supplement over the winter is a good idea uh, for all athletes and for everybody really to help make sure that yeah we're not deficient in that. And then the only other two that I'm going to kind of focus on in particular is iron and vitamin C. So iron is a really key nutrient, helps us transport oxygen around the body, and probably one that we're all quite familiar with in terms of if you don't have enough iron, you often feel quite tired, maybe can't train as well. Um, we have increased requirements as athletes generally, because you get foot strike iron losses. So people that are involved in kind of running events and things, yeah, you will be kind of breaking down iron as you run. So that's one way where athletes have kind of higher requirements. And also for female athletes having periods each month, that also increases our requirements. So trying to include red meat if you do eat that, then that's really helpful. Dark green leafy veg, spinach, kale, that kind of thing also includes good sources of iron. And quinoa is a good carb that also has a bit of iron in it as well. And the nutrient that goes hand in hand with iron is vitamin C. So vitamin C helps to absorb iron. So if you've ever been given iron tablets, you might have been told to take it with a drink of orange juice. And that is really because the vitamin C in the orange juice helps us to absorb the iron. So having something like if you had a breakfast cereal, for example, like Weetabix, that's fortified with a bit of iron. And then if you had a glass of orange juice with that, that would help to absorb it. So thinking about how some of these nutrients go hand in hand can help us to get, yeah, the most out of what we're eating, really. Okay. So, and then just a quick bit on in terms of vegetarian and vegan diets, highlighting some of the key nutrients that you might not be getting enough of because of the certain things that you're excluding from your diet. So some of the key things, thinking about omega-3 that you would naturally get from oily fish. I've kind of highlighted some of the things that you could get it from in terms of plant-based sources. Probably the most important ones in terms of vegan diets would be things like iodine and selenium, I think are quite key in terms of vegan diets. Certainly iodine, you definitely need to supplement if you're not having any kind of milk or dairy or anything. That's definitely one that you would need to supplement with. And I guess just the iron in plant-based sources is not quite as well absorbed. So you might need to, again, have a little bit more of these other things as well. Okay, and then I know I've mentioned there a little bit in terms of supplements, whether that's vitamin D or whether, like you say, you're not able to get some other nutrients and you might supplement with them. But I would always, always come back to, first of all, think how we can get that nutrient in with food before we think about a supplement. So if you don't have any kind of dairy foods at the moment, I would think about, well, how could we kind of introduce some alternatives that will help me get some calcium rather than going straight to, well, I'll just take a calcium supplement. Because we absorb the nutrients much better from food. And I think it's just much healthier for us to be able to try and get it through our diet before thinking about supplements. There are certain instances where you will need a supplement, whether that's vitamin D or whether that's because you're not able to get it in with food. And I guess this is when I just wanted to highlight the importance of athletes checking what is in any supplements that they take. So I'm sure you might have been mentioned this on other kind of webinars, but it's really important that athletes are looking for kind of batch testing programs when they're looking at supplements. I've highlighted one here, which is called Informed Sport, which is quite a popular one in the UK. And you might see this logo on certain supplements, sports drinks, and things. And what that means is it's part of kind of a quality assurance program. So it means that they're taking these batches, they're testing them, and they're giving you a certificate to say, this is clear of contaminated substances. It might sound trivial and you might be in a stage where you're thinking, well, I'm nowhere near the stage where someone's going to, be testing me for drugs and things. But I think it's a really, really good habit to get into. And, kind of it is, again, a good way of thinking about choosing kind of reputable supplements that come from kind of reputable sources. So if you were to go onto that Informed Sport website, you could literally type in vitamin D or calcium or anything else, and it would give you a list of all the ones that are batch tested. So that might be just quite an interesting thing to do and go on to anyway. And you can maybe check anything that you're taking at the moment. But definitely coming back to how can I get it through food, first of all. Okay. And then just thinking about hydration. So people always like my little colour chart down the side here. But it's still a good measure of how hydrated we are, unless you've had beetroot or you take lots of vitamin C, for example, it might be bright yellow then. But urine colour is a good monitoring tool, and generally we want to be towards the top. Uh, what I guess one of the key things I would say is probably making sure your fluid intake is good through the day. So people are often quite good at taking a bottle with them to training, but I think making sure at school, college, work, whatever we're doing, you're drinking regularly through the day. A very rough guide is this 35 millilitres per kilogram of body weight. But again, it is very, very rough. You will know yourself if you sweat quite a lot when you're training, if you maybe feel like salty sweat on your face after a longer session, your requirements are going to be much greater than someone else. And again, it will change depending on the weather conditions. Sometimes, though, even at this time of year, we can underestimate the fluid that we need and how much we sweat because it's cold and you think, oh, I'm not actually that thirsty, but we are still sweating. So it's still really important to be having regular fluid intake. I've put electrolytes at the bottom. So electrolytes are kind of salts that we need in our body to help regulate our fluid. So some of you might use little tablets that you add into your water, and that adds in some kind of sodium, potassium, and things that help our body to kind of hydrate a little bit better and hold on to the fluid. You can also use kind of ordinary squash and add in a little pinch of salt that again is like a homemade kind of electrolyte drink that helps to hydrate you a little bit better. So I think the key at this stage is regular intake and yeah, making sure that if you are someone who does sweat a lot, or say, for example, you're doing indoors where that's quite a dehydrating environment, that you're adding that little pinch of salt or using kind of electrolyte tablet on those days. Okay, so thinking about as I've gone through some of those food groups there, how would what you either wrote down or what you thought about a little bit earlier on, how would that compare? So do you think actually, well, I didn't really have any protein till my evening meal, or I didn't really have much carbohydrate, I didn't have a snack before training, or I don't really have much calcium. Maybe note down a couple of things that you think, maybe I could think about that food group and think about ways that I could get a little bit more of that in. Because I think we often just get into kind of habits of we eat the same things or we go for the same things at the shops. And sometimes it's just thinking about things slightly differently and thinking, well, actually, I could try a yogurt or I could try something as a snack can help us to kind of just optimize our diet a little bit more. Okay, so for the next kind of parts of the session, I'm going to look at specifically kind of pre and post training nutrition and then have a little think about what happens when we're not quite getting enough in our diet and kind of warning signs to look out for. So I kind of want everyone to have a think about, do you always have a snack before training or racing, I guess? Is there anything specific that you like to have? I know some people might have a specific thing that they're like, this is what I have before training. Or do you take something with you to have just after you finish? These are both really key times to help prepare our body and help our body recover afterwards. And some of the things at the bottom there are good options. So whether that's, chocolate spread on toast, your jam sandwich, some sort of cereal bars, these are all really good options to have pre and post training. So other options that I've put in terms of just a few extra ideas for you in terms of pre-training snacks or again between rounds of competition because all we're really doing is trying to top up our body in terms of how much carbohydrate and things is there. We don't necessarily want to have then a meal that's got lots of protein, lots of fiber, and lots of things for our body to be digesting, because then we want our body to be all that energy going to our muscles rather than digesting our food. So porridge pots are really handy if you're away and traveling and things, the ones that you can just add a bit of hot water into. They can be really handy as kind of easy snacks during the day. Like I say, kind of white carbs, what I call them, like Scotch pancakes, crumpets, little brioche rolls, things that are really quite easy to eat, but just top up your energy levels. Little pots of rice pudding, things like that. But generally, especially on race day, I would say stick with something that you like, because I think if you like it, then when even if you're feeling a bit nervous or your appetite's not as brilliant, you're more likely to eat it than if it's something that you're kind of like, oh, well, I should have this, but I don't really like it. So I would say to kind of build your nutrition on race day and things around things that you really enjoy. And then recovery nutrition. So, probably like the most key thing, if you take nothing else away from tonight, is thinking about everyone having something to eat or drink within that first half an hour after training, because this is the time when your body is recovering at its quickest, it's taking up loads of energy, and it's desperately trying to recover you ready for your next session. So, these first 30 minutes, if you can have an initial snack within that time, massively helps with immunity, bone health, how sore you're going to feel the next day, and just how well you can then train again the following day and the day after. So, generally, around 50 grams of carbohydrate is what I would recommend in that post training snack. And in terms of what 50 grams looks like, I always think about, well, what is the volume of food or drink like? What's the most efficient way to get that in after training? So each of these lines here is 50 grams of carbohydrate. So we've got my 500 mils of chocolate milk. It doesn't need to be chocolate, it could be any flavour. The only reason I've added a flavour is because it just boosts the carbohydrate content from plain milk. So Nesquik is a brilliant one. Whatever flavour you like, added into some milk is a brilliant post-training snack. You could have something like a large flapjack and a banana. And if you were having more of what I call like kind of healthy foods, you would have to have the kind of the apple and the yogurt and honey and the cereal bar. And that might take quite a lot of eating after training. So that's why sometimes having a kind of more drink-based recovery, whether that's a smoothie or whatever, can be easier. I know certainly when I finished a hard track session, the last thing I wanted to do was kind of eat something. So having something that's in a drink format can sometimes be a little bit easier to start that recovery process really quickly. And then just thinking about, because this is something people are always asking me about, well, how do I plan my day? And I think if I was, and I guess I can't menu plan for everybody here, but in terms of you were creating your own plan, what I would do is start with a bit of paper and write down your training on it first of all, or your races. So instead of thinking about, right, I've got my meals and now I'm putting in my training, I do it the other way around. So put your training down first and the times that you're training or racing. Then around that, add what you're going to have around training. So add that pre and post training snack. So it might be that 90 minutes before you have some toast with jam or a bagel and some chocolate spread or something. Then afterwards, you might have your flavoured milk or hot chocolate or smoothie. Then you've kind of built your nutrition around that training. Think about then add travel or anything else you've got into that day. Then pop in your meal, your main meal. So when you're going to have breakfast and things around that, what you're going to have to drink. And then you can look and think, well, actually, am I missing any specific food groups? Have I got quite a long gap between my meals? But I would definitely recommend trying this, even if it's just for one training day and one competition day, because I think the way that you plan your food around competition and training can massively take away some of that stress on the day of, oh, what am I going to have? So, in the same way as you would plan your warm up, when you're going to go to call room, when you're going to arrive at the venue, all these things, add in what snacks you're going to have around that. And that can really help build some good habits to take forward to future competition. And what that might look like, I guess, just thinking about um, building a day for someone who is maybe at school or college in the afternoon. You might have your lunch kind of 2 to 4 hours before. That might be a kind of standard, you know, baguette, bagel, sandwich, jacket potato, something that's got some carbs, some protein, some fluid. Then you might have kind of school or college in the afternoon. Then about 3 o'clock, well, depending on what time you go to training, you might have that kind of fast acting carb snack. So that might be like your malt loaf or your jam sandwich or something. Um, then you might go to training, like say whatever time you are training at, making sure you're kind of hydrating well during that. Then you're having your recovery snack within half an hour, then followed up by your main meal. So I think trying to get that kind of structure through the day, I think can really help, especially when you're quite busy with getting straight from one thing to another, uh, in the afternoon, early evening time. Planning in what you're going to have and making sure you've got it with you can be really helpful. Okay, so final bit of tonight, and thank you for being with me. I know I feel like I've talked at you a lot now, but I will get to the questions that have been coming in. But I just wanted to think about what can go wrong when we don't quite feel well enough. And to start thinking about that, I like to use this little low power mode sign. So I'm sure most of you will have seen this pop up, whether it's your phone, a family member's phone, anyone. Uh, and it's thinking about what happens when this appears on your phone. It's usually when your battery's got to a certain level and it still works as a phone, but it turns off some background functions. So things like it might not receive all your emails or update your social media or do certain things like that, but it still works as a phone. And I guess for me, this is kind of what's happening in your body. So if you're not quite getting enough energy in, your body's still going to function as a body. It's still going to let you go training and do things, but you'll maybe start to notice certain things don't quite go as well. So you just might not be training quite as well as you were before, or you might not be um you might just be feeling more tired all the time or more irritable and things just don't seem quite right, but nothing that you can kind of put your finger on. That might be the sign of slipping into kind of low energy availability. And I know Lindsay said we're going to do a specific webinar around Red S, but I just usually like to touch on this a little bit within kind of, especially for younger athletes, in terms of what that means and some of the kind of consequences of that. So if we're not getting enough energy to fuel our training and everything that's going on in our body, it can have lots and lots of different effects throughout the body. So it's not just about, and I guess historically we would think, well, if female athletes are not having a period, then that's a problem. It affects their bone health. But it's not just about female athletes and it's not just about bones or periods. There's so many other parts of the body that it can affect. And I think it can, like you say, affect all these different body systems and can be quite can kind of take quite a while to come on, I guess. So I guess for female athletes, we've got that early warning sign of missing a period can be a sign that we're not getting enough energy. For male athletes, it might go on for a little bit longer before it's detected, and that might be because of an injury or something else going wrong. So what we want to do is try and pick this up as early as possible. And I guess that's thinking about some of these effects that it can have on training and maybe just keeping an eye out for these either within your training group or yeah, within kind of friends and things as well. So is it that, like you say, you're not progressing in the gym as much as you were? You're picking up little niggly injuries all the time? If it's some of the kind of technical events, your kind of coordination or concentration and things is not quite as good. They're all quite vague symptoms, and I know they could all be part of other things, but if you're recognising that there are a few of those that fit, it might be something to think about. So think about, again, key points of increases in training load. So again, I often see if athletes go away to university, then their training load will go up quite a lot and maybe their nutrition doesn't go up as well. So thinking about every time you add more into your training, we need to think about how are you going to fuel that? So how are we going to add a little bit more through our diet? Any kind of changes in eating habits. So, as your routine changed, are you now rushing from school to training and you're not getting home to get something to eat? Are you just feeling more and more tired all the time? So, we know it's more you're going to be tired from everything that you're doing with school and training and things. But if you're feeling more and more tired every day, that's more of a kind of warning sign. Changes in body composition. So I guess a myth around red S and low energy availability is that everyone loses weight. Not everybody loses weight. So you can maintain your weight and still not be getting enough fuel in. And that's because your body tries really, really hard to keep your weight steady. So I think, yes, we can sometimes see a weight loss, but not always. So if you're getting some of these other symptoms, it's still worth thinking about. And like you say, just that unexplained reduction in training performance, not quite doing as well despite putting the training in and things. And if that is the case, if you're thinking, oh well, actually, maybe I'm not getting enough energy in, and for growing athletes, for especially if you're at school doing extra sport at school, it can be really difficult to get enough food in a day. So I think some of these quick wins, I kind of call them, to kind of increase your energy availability can be really helpful. So, like I said, kind of at the start, in terms of increasing eating opportunities across the day. So, is it that actually you could try and take a small snack to have at break time? Could we put in some of these, fill some of these gaps where you're not having anything? Could you swap to full fat milk or yogurt? So that's a really easy one where you're not adding extra volume, but that simple shift can add a little bit extra energy. Another favourite of mine is adding toppings to things. So if that's porridge, for example, adding some dried fruit and nuts, seeds, peanut butter, anything like that. Being really key with your recovery nutrition, so helping your body to really start that process quickly. And getting energy in drinks, so what I call kind of nourishing drinks, like whether that's milkshakes, smoothies, plain milk to drink, um, all hot chocolate, all these things that help to just boost that energy a little bit more. Think about using more good fats because they're more energy dense, whether it's your avocado, having more kind of oily fish, things like that. And then it might be that at a kind of late, potentially a later stage, or depending on what your training volume's like, you start to think about fueling during training. And that might be even for kind of younger athletes who end up being at the track for a long time, having a snack in the middle of that can be really helpful to help you kind of recover well. And especially, I guess, athletes that then have moved away or you're thinking about moving away, batch cooking meals, having things in the freezer is key for after training because the last thing you want to do when you come home is start cooking. So I think thinking about how you manage your week and how you manage your food around those kind of situations can be really, really key for fueling well. So thank you so much for getting to this point. This is my last slide, and then I'll come to the questions. But I guess my kind of take-home message comes back to that top line that I had at the start in terms of we need to be fueling our health if we're going to perform well. And especially at this stage, we just want to be getting all the basics right. And I know that doesn't grab headlines and it doesn't have lots of shiny marketing, but I think if we can do the basics really well, it gives you a brilliant foundation to then build on some of these extra things that help give you that extra 1% in the future. So really regular eating during the day, considering your gaps, any gaps that you have in food groups and nutrients. Really, really optimize that recovery window. So if you're not already doing that, that should hopefully be an easy-ish one to get in there. And then maybe have a think about some of those signs of not fueling, of under fueling, and if any of those kind of maybe fit for you. But ultimately, I think we should all be kind of focusing on fueling our health and performance, but also having the flexibility to support enjoyment in eating, social eating, going out with friends. I think that's a massive part of food. So I think what we don't want to do is become so focused on it that we can't deviate at all. I think being able to go out with friends and enjoy food is a massive thing. So I think, yeah, I want you all to be doing that as well. So thank you very much. I have put, which you will get kind of on the recording, just a few resources on here. And the first one there, Fitter Woman app, is an app for female athletes to track their periods. It's really helpful. It gives you some really nice little recipes that go along with different training, with different phases of your period and things. So that's quite a good one there. I've put British Cycling because they actually have some really good recipes. So I've kind of stolen some ones from there. That's quite a good link. If you are looking for more kind of general information on specific health conditions, specific nutrients, things like that, a good evidence-based source is the British Dietetic Association. So they've got quite a lot of good fact sheets. And then this Health for Performance site at the end, that has some more information on kind of very specific things for either parents, coaches, athletes, anyone really. So there are just a few kind of things I'd recommend because I know it can be a little bit of a minefield and there's lots and lots of information out there around nutrition and everyone has an opinion. So I would say to try and stick to some kind of reputable sources of information rather than just social media. That makes sense. So thank you so much for listening. Hopefully we've still got quite a lot of people there. No one's like kind of dropped off in the middle. Uh, I'll move on to questions then, if that's okay. And hopefully I can do this right. So I think, Lindsay or Fran, can you just nod at me? Do I just read them out and answer them? Yes. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to read out some of the questions that have been asked and then go through them. So if I start at the top, and someone has just asked if I'm able to talk about red S and how to keep on top of it if you have been diagnosed. So I would say if you have been diagnosed with red S, it's really important to make sure you are engaging with kind of either medical professionals, doctor. I think it's really important to get kind of your bloods tested and to kind of manage the medical side of red S. I think maybe just doing a bit of a self audit as well in terms of the things we've gone through tonight, in terms of how regularly you're eating. Are you having lots of food that's very, what I would call healthy food? And do you need a bit more energy density into your diet? Because I think that can be one thing where you can feel like you're eating quite a lot, but actually the energy content isn't brilliant. So rather than having rice cakes and peanut butter, I'd have a slice of toast with peanut butter, for example, as just a quick win to get a little bit more in. But I would say definitely come back to the other webinar that they're organising kind of into the next year. So, and then someone asked, is there a change in nutritional demands once you've stopped growing? Does carb demand reduce? So, yes, there definitely will be a slight change once you stop growing. I think, though, what often happens at that stage, once you move into kind of 20s and as a senior athlete, often then training demands increase because you maybe move on to training for senior events. You can train harder for longer because your body is fully kind of grown and you might be lifting heavier weights. So I would say it's maybe a difficult one to answer because I would say your carb demand might then increase because your training has increased. So there's maybe less demands on actual your growing, but there's other demands from elsewhere. But it would definitely depend on your training load, individual situation. So apologies, I'm going to be probably saying some things like, that depends, because some of the questions are maybe, yeah, would depend on your individual situation. But hopefully that's answered it a little bit. And then someone else has asked, what are some of the signs of having too much protein in our diet? Does this have anything to do with not managing to lose weight? So I would say unless you're having lots of protein supplements, you're unlikely to be getting too much protein just from your diet. So I think I'm not aware of any issues that would mean it wouldn't you wouldn't be able to lose weight. If you have too much protein, your body will convert that to it will break it down and store it as fat, so it will be kind of stored as that. But I guess, yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned if you're not having lots of supplements. And if you are, I would probably try and swap that for more kind of food sources of protein. Someone has asked, when did rapeseed oil become a healthy fat? So rapeseed oil, as far as I'm aware, is a monounsaturated fat, which is kind of healthier for our body, so it doesn't kind of raise the bad type of cholesterol, and it's slightly healthier for our body. Although all fats will contain the same amount of energy. So if we're thinking about it from an energy perspective, then that will, yeah, still be the same. And someone else has asked, what would you recommend pre-race for someone that vomits and feels sick with pre-race nerves, and when should they eat before the race? So yeah, I think this is probably quite a common question I would get, and I think it's you do have to experiment a little bit. Like I say, generally on race day, I would definitely stick with some sort of white carb, white bread. I would kind of avoid maybe if you do struggle with kind of nerves and things, I'd avoid maybe your cereal with milk and things on race day because that might just add in too much extra stuff. I would stick with really simple things like your crumpets or pancakes or something like that. And I would maybe give it a little bit longer, like 2 to 3 hours before the race. Potentially then top up with some kind of Lucozade and things so that you are still topping up energy closer to the race. But I think it's a bit of trial and error and to see what works. I think if you're really well fueled in the days leading up to the event, on the day, all you are doing is topping up. So I wouldn't worry too much if you don't manage to get loads in on that day. But definitely sticking to those kind of fast acting carbohydrates that I spoke about and try not to get too much um, additional fiber, fats, things like that in there. So it might be a little bit of trial and error. It might be something to think about in the future, to think about some sports psychology type input that can help with kind of strategies for managing nerves and anxiety, because I know that that's been a big part for some people as well that can help manage that side of things. Um, so hopefully that answers that a little bit. And someone said, how important is it to take multiple vitamin and or mineral tablets at different times throughout the day? So I'm not entirely sure there if they're asking about if the timing of taking vitamins is important or if you should take lots of vitamins. So I'll try and answer kind of both ways. So I guess unless someone else has just put something else in the boat. No, okay. So I think in terms of vitamins and minerals, ideally we just want to be getting it in our food, basically. If you were taking additional vitamins, um, things like vitamin D, for example, are absorbed best with fats. So we're better taking these with a meal. So they're better taken kind of with a meal. If you're taking an iron supplement, it's better taken away from other foods. So kind of last thing at night is often a good time to take an iron supplement. Uh, so if that doesn't answer that, then put something else in at the bottom and I'll come back to it. Someone else has asked what foods contain vitamin D. And so the main foods that contain vitamin D would be things like oily fish, salmon is a really good one for vitamin D, egg yolks, little bits of nuts and seeds. But again, the amount that you get from those foods is still quite small. So even if you were eating those foods all the time, you're probably still unlikely to get the amount of vitamin D that you would need. And someone else said, can you skip the post-training snack if you have a main meal straight after with complex carbs? I mean, I would still, I guess it would depend on your entire circumstance, but I would still say that that initial post-training snack is still important because generally, even if we're going straight home to have a meal, we've still got a bit of time between warming down, getting in the car, getting home, and having our meal. And those kind of faster acting carbs will actually get into our system and help start that recovery a little bit quicker than if we were having the complex carbs with the main meal, with the protein and things. So that initial hit of recovery nutrition, I think, is still really important. Someone else said, how much vitamin D should a teenager take in a supplement during the winter months? Something around 1,000 international units, and I'm just trying to convert that because I think it's 25 micrograms is a good amount for an athlete to take. Um, in a vitamin D supplement. So yeah, either see it as IU, which is international units, or micrograms, which is like UG. So either 1,000 international units, 25 micrograms, that would be the kind of that would be what I'd recommend. And someone said, in terms of optimizing sleep, are there any foods that you'd recommend or final meal fluid timing advice? Yeah, that's a good question that I probably didn't mention. So that kind of last meal of the day, it doesn't matter if you, because some people will say, oh, we shouldn't eat in the evening. It doesn't matter if you eat later on as long as you can sleep well. Sometimes we need to leave about an hour or so between eating and sleeping to make sure things have digested. In having some sort of dairy based thing in the evening, like yogurt, milk, something like that, can help with recovery overnight. So I know that's not necessarily sleep, but recovery overnight because the protein in dairy is casein, which is a longer acting form of protein. So that can help us kind of recover overnight. In terms of sleep, I guess there's not well, recently there's been some articles that kiwi fruits can help you sleep better, but I'm not entirely sure of the source of that, so I wouldn't maybe recommend we all start eating loads of kiwi fruits, but you could give it a go. Magnesium is something that can help with sleep, but that's only really been tested in much more of a supplement setting. So in terms of bits of magnesium we get from food, that probably wouldn't have a massive um that probably wouldn't play a massive part in our sleep. So I'd maybe think about leaving that last hour or so between eating and going to bed and see if that helps. Um, okay. And yeah, someone's asked about kind of dentists. So about how to balance the kind of higher sugar snacks with the dentist not liking those. And yeah, I agree. That is a problem. I think trying to make sure that I guess some of those sweeter things are have you're having them with other things or like that kind of pre and post training thing, that's kind of one episode type thing. So I guess what you want to avoid is grazing all throughout the day, is as much as I can say on that, really. I think from a sports nutrition point of view, we do need these things in there. I know some athletes have got a kind of higher fluoride toothpaste that, especially athletes maybe training for marathons, are using a lot of gels because we know it is an issue. Um, but I would say maybe balancing it with milk, for example, is a good example of something that is still like an energy dense drink, but without quite as much sugar as maybe a pure fruit smoothie, for example. Someone else has asked how often can we have takeaways or fast food? So I guess I'm definitely not going to be like the food police to say how often can you have that. But I think we just want to make sure that it's not it's not the kind of majority of times in your diet, I will say. So I would say if it's just now and again, or if it's a convenience thing after a certain training session, or you don't have anything, that's a better option. But we still want to be getting all our healthier things in uh, beforehand. And someone else has said about again, kind of instead of pre-race, it's post-race feeling sick and vomiting during a kind of threshold run, and said that they eat kind of 3 hours before. Again, I'd probably just think about what you're having on that whole day. So as well as leading up to that run, I'd really try and maybe keep yourself a little bit of a food diary and identify if there's anything you're always having that's maybe a bit higher in, like whether it's kind of a bit higher in fat, a bit higher in fiber, or anything you can think about that is gonna, maybe kind of trigger that during the session. And maybe again think about topping up with some sort of easy to digest snack like an hour before, because sometimes again if it's been like 3 hours, you're kind of your body's almost getting hungry again by the time you train, and that can lead to some of those feelings. So that might be something I would say there. Um, I'm just trying to flick through to see if there's any that are a similar theme. Someone's asked if taking electrolyte tablets every day is okay for your body. If you're just taking one, that's absolutely fine. I wouldn't take any more than two a day, even if you sweat a lot. I would just stick to that. Um, Someone's asked, would a focaccia be okay before a race? And I think that'd be really good. White carbs, yeah, something like that would be ideal. I've heard kind of baguettes, like nice white bread, something like that would be a good idea. Um, Someone has mentioned about having a son who's diabetic, and I would say that's probably not something I could answer in this specific setting because I would probably need to gather more information about that. So if you wanted to ask a more detailed question, then that would kind of need to be offline, I guess. And then someone said, what kind of food would you recommend to eat between events that are around 1 hour apart? So again, that would come back to those fast-acting carbohydrates, something white carbs that's really easy and quick for your body to digest. Uh, Someone's asked, would a multivitamin each day be suitable, or do you recommend specific individual vitamins? I guess that depends on where you're at in terms of what your overall diet looks like. So I think sometimes we think, oh, I'll just take a multivitamin and that'll be fine. But I would really, really encourage you to have a think about where we could plug some of those gaps with food, first of all, and then maybe just supplement with the specific ones that you're struggling to get in. Um, Someone's asked, are vegetables better cooked or raw? And if overcooked, does that damage the absorption benefit from the nutrients? Good question. So, again, some of that will depend on how well people tolerate things, for example. So some people in terms of stomach can tolerate things very well cooked, but their stomach doesn't really like it if it's a bit more raw. Ideally, things that are raw are going to have the most in it. It depends how you cook things. So, for example, if you boil vegetables and pour away the water, we lose a lot in the water. If you steam vegetables or something like that, that will retain everything. So I think that more depends on how you cook things. So in terms of fiber guidance, yeah, that is a good point. I guess for younger athletes in particular, by including some of those complex carbohydrates with meals, having a breakfast cereal in the morning, that should help with meeting kind of fiber requirements throughout the day. Making sure you are having like your fruit and veg and things. I guess I maybe focus on that a bit less during this because some of that is a lot of what people get in terms of healthy eating advice, and I kind of focus a little bit more in terms of, I guess, getting enough energy and things in that we need during the day. But yeah, that is a good point. Good question. Someone has asked, should I avoid foods that have additives in them? I often look for bars with the least, oh, I've now lost the question, or as natural as possible. And I'm trying to find a chocolate milk without any additives. So I think this is a really current one. And I think we've probably heard a lot about ultra processed foods that's in the media at the moment. And what that means is things that contain ingredients that the definition is ingredients that you wouldn't find in an average household kitchen or store cupboard, for example. And I guess I probably kind of sit on the fence with this because, yes, while we want to kind of ideally have what we call whole foods and things that are as natural as possible, there will be instances where, for convenience, we need like a sports food or a recovery drink that does have additives. And I would say in that instance, it's still better to have it and recover well and get the benefit of that rather than not. But I do completely appreciate that people have different opinions on that. I know in terms of chocolate milk, you were saying you were struggling to find one without additives. I would probably recommend again using kind of your own milk and adding something like Nesquik because yes, that might still have additives, but again, it's fortified with extra vitamins and minerals because it is designed for children. So that's probably the simplest way I would say. Or do something like blend a banana with some milk or blend some actual chocolate with some milk or something like that, melt it in. That would probably be the most natural way. But I think I would still prioritize getting the fuel in rather than overthinking too much exact ingredients that are in the foods. Um, Someone else has asked, can poor nutrition affect growth and delay puberty in young children? So yes, definitely. I think at that younger age, and I've definitely seen athletes on a one-to-one basis, um, young girls who have maybe then not quite been eating well enough, not been getting enough energy in, and maybe getting to kind of 16, 17 onwards and haven't started their periods yet. And yes, while there will be other factors in that and other things like family history and other things like that, I think not getting enough of what we need at that age can definitely contribute to some of these issues kind of later on. And someone's asked, can electrolyte tablets within water contribute to diabetes if taken over a long period? So, specifically, the electrolyte tablets that are available from lots of different companies, they don't contain any sugar. So it is just like the salts and sodiums and sodiums and potassiums and things in very small amounts. So that wouldn't contribute to any increase in sugar or risk of kind of diabetes later on. Someone else has said that white breads upset your stomach. Is wholemeal bread still okay when you're talking about a quick carb intake? So, I mean, yes, you can have, I would suggest more brown bread rather than wholemeal, just because the more seeds or fiber and things in there, it's just going to slightly delay how quickly it goes into your body. But it's still much better than not having anything. So, I would still definitely do that. So, and then the last one on here I can see is, how does recovery from injury impact on your nutritional demands? Very good question, which again, we could probably do a whole other webinar on. But I think, again, it depends on the type of injury. So, I think if you have an injury like a bony injury, like a stress fracture or something, where you're then having to offload on crutches or whatever, we can often think, oh, well, I must need much, much less because I'm not doing as much. But I think, especially in that initial phase after the injury, your body's working really, really hard to start that healing process. So I think making sure, especially that you've got enough protein in at that time. So especially making sure that you're hitting that 2 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein. I think that's a really, really key one for kind of recovering from injury. And I would always say to people to kind of not be too quick in taking lots of things out their diet, because I think we often underestimate how much your body needs in terms of healing and things. Yes, if you're then kind of not doing anything for a sustained period of time, your requirements will come down. But I think often then our appetite drops as well. So I think we still need to make sure that we are having enough through the day. And yes, specific injuries, there will be specific nutrition strategies. But from a general perspective, that's probably what I would say. Um, so I think that's everything that's on there just now. Hopefully, we've still got some people with us. I can't see anything, but yeah, so hopefully I've answered most of what was on there in terms of what I could see. Um, like say if there's anything that I've missed or anything more specific, then feel free to kind of email that over, and I will try my best to get back to you. Let me just, oh, someone else has added one more, and then someone else has asked, is having an inconsistent period ranging from 32 to 45 days sign of low energy, even if it's always been the case and not a recent change? So I would say that could be your natural cycle. I think that kind of length of cycle could be a length of cycle, but I think it's probably more if you see a change where it starts going longer or you're frequently missing months. So if between 32 and 45 days is normal for you, that's probably absolutely fine. It's more if you start then going much, much longer or missing one or two that's more of a sign. But yeah, that's a good point. And someone else has asked, how do you manage protein carb intake if trying to lose weight but keep training worthwhile? Yes, good one as well. Um, so I would say Generally, I would still prioritize your nutrition around your training sessions. So I would still keep in your pre and post training nutrition because your metabolic rate is raised around training. So that's going to be used quickly anyway. And then I would think about portion sizes at other meals. So thinking about reducing portion sizes there, swapping snacks to healthier snacks. Um, Again, you could drop to skimmed milk or making some of these little changes so that we're subtly managing energy intake without compromising training. So yeah, I wouldn't be taking out my post-training recovery snack. I would focus on kind of other aspects of the day. But generally for young athletes, growing athletes, we, yeah, they are using a lot of energy, whether that's just through mental energy at school and things. So I would, yeah, prioritize kind of keeping in most of those things. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for some really, really good questions as well, and for everyone that sent in questions beforehand. I've really, really enjoyed kind of going through those. And yeah, like I say, although I can't see you all, I can see the numbers, and I really, really appreciate you all joining tonight. And I will hand back to Lindsay or Fran to kind of sign off now, if that's okay.